as I talked about in the last video, and we quickly reviewed all the three different inventions, one of the ones we talked about was the steam engine. And the steam engine really impacted transportation. So not only did we have an invention with actual machines, but now how did we apply this technology and what impact it does? And so one of the first things that was built as people began to move out west, and remember this is right before the War of 1812, the whole idea of Native Americans attacking settlers there, and how do you move goods when you come here to establish a farm in the middle of Illinois? How do you do that? Well, one of the things that was decided was we need a national road. And so the first national road was built in the northern states. And why the northern states? Because here was the manufacturing. Here is where the goods were produced. So you want to go to the origin or the genesis of where they're produced to move them to where they were needed. It allowed greater movement of people and goods. Instead of a trail, here is an actual road that was created and established. But it's still a road. Just like on our highways, you're in a car, it only can carry so much. Wagons only can carry so much. Even though it was a road, it still had great limitations in terms of moving greater amounts. But so then they began to think, well, from just moving wagons, if we could create canals, if we could do some other things. And so the Erie Canal was decided to be built. Now the Erie Canal was going to hook up with Lake Erie and open up to a river system in New York to open up this passage. And if we could get it to Lake Erie, then we could move to the other Great Lakes, because through them being connected, and we could move even greater amounts of people, products, things, ideas. And so the Erie Canal, it was built in the 1820s. It was built by hand. There were no big backloaders and things like that. And it's still today quite a feat. And this canal, which connected us to waterways, allowed us to move much greater amounts by boat, which improved business, got more things out west, and really promoted, if you have a boat full of fresh plows that were forged and created, and you want to bring them out to the new country to be sold for these farmers coming out to create their new farms, it was very much a business increaser. And so here is, not did they only create an Erie Canal to Lake Erie, but then from here, the idea of canals to move products quite easily was the way to go. And so here is the canal system. It connected the factories in the east to the settlers in the west. So you put your things on a boat on this canal, you hit Lake Erie, and then you start going through the Great Lakes as they are connected. And then you can wind up and get it to Chicago. So it gave settlers what they needed. And that all changed, that huge change, when they began to create the steamboat and the steam engine. And so now they looked at, well, if we create the steamboat, we're still locked in and limited to waterways. And we still have to adapt and move things by waterways. We can't just move it over any part of the country. And now people are moving out west, and they're not settling by a major river or where rivers meet. So how are we going to easily get products to them? So they decided, well, let's see if we could do rails, do trains. And so when they developed the first, what they call iron horse, and the reason why we get the term horsepower when you ask what size engine and what's the horsepower is because it started out as a race between horses pulling these wheeled boxcars and a steam engine, an engine pulling the car. So if the engine beat the horse, well, it had 1 horsepower, at least 1 horsepower. If it beat 2 horses that were pulling it, it has 2 horsepower. That's where we get those that measurement by. But in 1830, only 13 miles of track, only 13 miles. Think about that. Think about how short that is. Were built by the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. In 20 years later, 9,000 miles of track were built. And in 10 short years later, we have 31,000 miles of track. So the idea of railroads and having railroads bring products in places, here is your railroad revolution of the 1850s. We're not even, as a country, 100 years old. And look at where all the railroad lines, most of them are at. They are from the manufacturing centers and the shipping centers. So if we want to start shipping overseas and selling overseas, to the centers, the hubs for people moving out west and developing and claiming the Louisiana Territory. So, a lot of the railroad lines were built by immigrant labor. The Irish from the Great Potato Famine, groups like that came over. And the immigrant labor built most of them in the north. It gave the North a great advantage in terms of moving people and things and ideas. Slave labor built most of the southern railroads, and the railroads determined much of the development in the areas. So in the places where you see a lot of these tracks, there are many more people, more cities, more things going on. The country expands, and so does transportation. It facilitates the movement of goods, things. Farmers take their resources that they've grown and they ship it back east to the factories. The factories produce things with those resources and ship them back to the farmers to buy. People are moving across the country. They're not isolated in their own little world, and they're being exposed to other lifestyles and other ideas and other information. So this was especially true as people began to move out west. So now we see that there were our political government, and then there was all this industrial revolution, these new inventions, and our country is being forever molded and changed by this. And in the next video, we'll see what it led to.